We are hopeless, selfish creatures, and we need a savior.
She was a total heathen.
All right, we're doing a podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome again to another episode of an Exmo.
And a Nevermo,
Walk into a bar. I'm Kate, this is Erica, and we are filming from Land of a Thousand Hills Coffee, which is our favorite place to film. Just grateful to be here and to be enjoying all of their food and drink.
Yes, and just to reiterate, anything that we express in our episodes, they are our point of view, sometimes not even ours. But definitely not the point of view of wherever we are shooting, and not the point of view of Land of a Thousand Hills. But we do love it here. We love the food, we love the drink, we love the people. It is our home away from home, and we love shooting here.
And speaking of point of view, ours is a little bit more critical. So if you're looking for a faith-affirming podcast, this is not it.
Go look elsewhere. You won't like this one if you're looking for faith-affirming stuff.
Right.
And then finally, you may have noticed that we are twinning today.
Twinners!
These are t-shirts from our sponsor for this episode, the Sunshine Community, run by Sarah Albert here in Daybreak and the greater Salt Lake area. It is a group of women supporting women, particularly in business, but across lots of different platforms, modalities, whatnot. But it's a really lovely group of women that we love to be friends with and to work with. And we were just gifted these t-shirts today, so we are twinning them.
Absolutely. So our episode today, Erica, is post field trip that we took.
Field trip!
Yay! Erica and I went on a field trip this last weekend to the Sunstone Symposium, which you had never heard of before, right?
No, I have never been to the Sunstone Symposium before. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Just a very sort of like open, accepting space of people from, I would say probably mostly an ex-Mormon bent, some questioning Mormons, probably a few people like me, nevermormons, the weirdos that are there like, what's going on? Let's check this out. And then some people who were still Mormon as well, which surprised me. We actually had a conversation with somebody, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it was just a really interesting place with people with a lot of different ideas, where they could just talk about their backgrounds and things that are important to them within the Mormon space.
Right. Their motto has been more than one way to Mormon. And it's a conference. It's like a 3-day conference designed for anybody who has any ties to Mormonism or interest in it. It started out as a magazine several years ago. In fact, this was the 50th anniversary. It started out as a magazine where there were intellectuals that would just have different intellectual ideas about Mormonism, but done in such a deeply respectful way.
Yeah.
Where people from all shades of, everywhere across the spectrum, because Mormon belief is on a wide spectrum, everywhere from incredibly pious and obedient and to like the Jack Mormons down here who do it.
Who smoke, who drink, who do whatever the hell they want. Show their porn shelters, which I'm covering up right now.
Right.
I'm very Mormon.
But it's a great place for people to come and have respectful intellectual dialogue. And it was fascinating. My first experience with the Sunstone Symposium was 2 years ago, when I left the church on a Sunday, had like my coming out of church party on a Thursday, and went to Sunstone on Friday. It was, like I tell people all the time, it was the best exit of the church experience a person could have had. Where
I could imagine.
I was surrounded by people who were like me, who had questions about the faith and wanted to find community of people who were also going through the similar things. So Sunstone was great for me that year. And then last year I had an opportunity to present. So I submit I submit a request to present, and I was approved and got to talk because the theme at the time was about, cleaning house and like what kind of traditions do you want to hold on to? What do you want to let go of as you're making transitions within your faith? And I was like, ooh, pick me. My experience was also when I first left the church, I was going through a divorce and packing up house and moving into the unknown. And while I was doing so, I kind of sat with myself and thought, I've been told what to believe my whole life. What do I believe now? And so my idea was kind of to use the Marie Kondo, if you're familiar with her, the magic of tidying up, just to take all of these things that you all of your beliefs and your values, and you hold on to those that spark joy. And if it doesn't spark joy, get rid of it. And so the things that didn't spark joy were like Joseph Smith and polygamy and anything that was unique to Mormonism, super easy to get rid of. But then, as with this deconstruction model of the Marie Kondo, was just holding on to deeply held values and deciding how to make a life from there. So I had an opportunity to present last year, and then just this year, you and I got to go experience it just as attendees or participants, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and it was, like you said, it was just a wonderful experience. Very respectful, very friendly. It was exhausting because we just talked with people pretty much all day. I came home and was totally pooped, and the next day I was like, I'm still so tired. But it was great. It was invigorating at the time, even though I was kind of wiped out afterwards because I'm kind of an introvert, and then you wouldn't know it.
I seriously never would have guessed ever.
But it was great, and just like a lot of really interesting dialogue, a lot of really great personalities, and we're going to talk about we got to go see 3 really great talks, so we'll talk a little bit about that and the people that we got to listen to and meet. The first one is someone that we've talked about just a tiny bit on another episode, Natasha Helfer. And she was Mormon. She was excommunicated she's a sex therapist, and she was helping people as you do as a therapist, and she was excommunicated from the church because she refused to say that masturbation is a sin, and she basically just adhered to her integrity and not even beliefs, but facts, basically, and said, I can't do this as a therapist, tell people these horrible things that are not true and that are harmful and unhealthy. And the church said, off with her head, and kicked her out. So she now is a sex therapist. Her talk was fascinating. She touched on a lot of interesting subjects. I think probably most of the room was ex-Mormon, although there were some Mormons there as well. And I was struck by a lot of things that she said. And do you have anything that you want to add to any of that?
Yeah, her name was one of the first that I heard when I was leaving the church, about how this sex therapist had been excommunicated. But when I was a member, I was like, well, of course.
She's talking about sex.
Because
what did she expect?
You're not allowed to talk about sex. And if you did, it had to be within the umbrella of the church, where men have always been told to not play with their little factories, and women to not dress a certain way because they would become porn. And we've talked extensively about how sex has been such a controversial and shaming topic within the church. And so when I remember hearing about her as a member, but it was kind of like, well, she knows the doctrine, she went against it, she kind of deserved it, to this transition where I came out of the church and thought, oh, well, this makes sense. Like, it's like you said, it's science-based, it's fact-based, like
not shame-based.
Not shame-based at all. It's just discovering who you are and what you like, and things that I've given myself permission to do since leaving the church. And I love how she is being a voice for people to not have shame about their bodies.
Yeah, I loved that too. And what was interesting to me is, she talked for not that long, I think probably about 20 minutes, and just sort of gave an introduction and a little bit about herself. And then she opened up the forum to a question and answer. The first thing that sort of fascinated me, it was really interesting, if you take a group of like the general population and you say, here's a sex therapist, you can ask them anything. You probably get different questions like, how do you go about this? How do you navigate this? Is this normal or is this not? Or more just sort of like, I guess, maybe specific questions about stuff that's happening in your own life. And the questions that people were asking, they were from a very different place. It was much more general. It wasn't like, hey, how do we introduce anal? Like,
right.
There wasn't anything like that. It was more like, I'm ex-Mormon now. I have all this baggage. How do I deal with that? Or I'm ex-Mormon and I have a child who's come out as gay and I'm struggling with that, even though I know it's okay. Like, how do I navigate that? So it was much more of like dealing with kind of this ingrained shame and how to even go about engaging with sex in a post-Mormon mindset, which was made sense, of course. It was just it was really interesting for me to sort of watch people who had all this crap put on them about their sexuality and then go to a sex therapist, and the questions that they would ask were really different, I think, from like a general population that would be asking those questions.
Because I think some of us are still afraid to ask those questions, even though I've mentioned before, I'm exploring things in a way that I've never been able to before. It's okay to do it like in the space of a bedroom, but it's still a little scary to talk about. We did our sex episode. I had to be really drunk for most of that conversation.
I was also really drunk, so it wasn't just on you. We were having a good time.
But we had a great time.
That was an awesome afternoon with some awesome ladies. A lot lot of the members of the Sunstone
Right.
community.
It was a lot of fun. But yeah, I think those questions were very valid coming from the place of an ex-Mormon when you've been taught your whole life to just not talk about it at all, to suddenly be given this freedom to talk about whatever you want. And it's kind of well, how do I talk about things that within the church have been so shameful for so long, rather than have a healthy body positivity kind of lifestyle. Let's talk about some other things. So it made a lot of sense to me, but it sounds like you were kind of coming from a place of like, why is this?
It made sense to me. It was just sort of interesting because I think people, for anybody, like, especially in the United States, like sex can be a shameful topic,
Right.
even outside of Mormonism. So there
Sure.
definitely would be those kinds of things. But like I don't know if you know who this is, but Dan Savage, who does the slog, he's like he's not a therapist. I don't even know if he's licensed or anything. He's just this like smart, interesting guy who writes a blog. He's a personality, but he answers people's sex questions. They're very, very different. As an example, like from what I was hearing here, like people will say like, I have this like bizarre fetish. Is it okay? And how would I go about that with somebody? Or, I'm interested in getting into this certain thing. And he'll sort of address that. These were more questions about unpacking shame and navigating something that they have been told how to do or think about their whole lives. So like that was super fascinating to me. It was also there were a lot of, I think, like sort of parallels to, actually, hold on, let me go back for 1 second, cut that. I'm going to say that afterwards. One of the things that I loved about the way that she talked about it specifically, and this was her personality, was she did not pull any punches. She did not pull back, and she did not pussyfoot around. And I think you might have been out of the room for some of this, but she was very open and honest about her own self and didn't say it in a like sort of sanitized way. Right. So I can't remember.
But also not in an offensive way either.
Not in an offensive way, but definitely in a like, I mean, I could see some people being offended by it or taken aback by it. I wasn't, and I don't think anyone in the room was, although it was interesting to be, I guess for me, part of the experience was interesting was that she was saying things that I don't actually hear very often in a public space, let alone in a group of Mormons or ex-Mormons. So just as a couple of examples that were really interesting and I think awesome for her. This is my first interaction with her. We got to meet her after. I love her. Her energy is amazing. She is a firecracker. She is smart. She is quick.
So positive and
unshameful and open and just she was just like, she was amazing. I really liked hearing her speak, and I liked hearing what she had to say. But, you know, at some point, someone asked a question, and she was talking kind of around the idea of mutual pleasure. And she was talking specifically about not just in Mormonism, but for everybody in specifically in the United States, probably in lots of other countries too. Sex is defined by the male orgasm, and it is done. That is the goal. Male orgasm is when it's finished, and if the ladies get there, and if not, who cares? That's not what it's really about.
Right.
And that's not an idea that I subscribe to, nor does anyone that I have slept with more than once. But in talking about that, you know, she said that she actually she's like a man, and I am actually sort of too. Like, she said, after I come, I face plant. Which is like, I'm just like, thank you. And her partner has to go like, hey, hello. But it was really interesting to me to hear, she didn't say orgasm or get there. She didn't use to, she was like, when I come. And I was like, wow, like this is a Mormon. Do they even know what that is?
Yeah.
Like, because in a lot of time, in a lot of instances, there is certain terminology that we like. When I'll say some things to you sometimes, and you're like, "What is that?" We were like talking about. My husband and I were joking about head when she was over once, and she's like, "What's head?" You know, it's like,
okay, I'm 47 years old. I'm like, huh?
So it was interesting to hear this group of people who probably fall more in that sort of category of maybe not knowing, like, lots of, and this woman just standing on a stage, a woman no less, saying, when I come, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, wow. And you could tell the room was kind of like, you know,
impressed. I mean,
impressed.
I was impressed.
Yeah.
That
I was
she's able to
too.
talk about it so openly and so unashamedly, because that's the complete opposite of the way so many of us have been raised. So I think she was an absolute rock star. One thing that I did want to point out is, like, Erica's got this great barometer. Anytime she hears something that is just, it literally makes her skin crawl. Her arm will be like covered with goosebumps, and she shows. And
you can see it.
Yeah, I literally.
Like,
she's like,
look. Now, but when things are crazy, I'm like, look at my arm.
No. So there was one point where Natasha addressed the audience and said, "How many of you men, when you were serving your mission, were told that the harder you worked and the better a missionary you were, the hotter your wife would be?" And literally every male's hand in the room went up. And Erica,
my face went like this.
I know.
And I literally had to go like, Erica, shut your jaw. And I was like, all the hairs stood up on my arm. I showed them to, I was like, what the fuck? Like, this is crazy.
We even had a man come after this talk and address Erica and was like, "So tell me about that."
And I think he said, like, so your jaw was hanging up. And I was like, yeah, it was a surprise. And not that, like, people don't want, like, hot spouses, but the fact that, like, that's not something that women are, you know, told. And when we'll get into that in a second, sort of like the different messaging that men and women are given, but that is so sort of antithetical to everything else that the church professes. The idea that church leadership would look at men and say, be really good. You get those baptisms, you get those people, you get that cha-cha-ching, you get us those dollars and that power, which is not what they're saying, obviously, to their faces. But that's what it is in reality. You get these baptisms, you go out there, boys, you get it, and your wife is going to be fucking hot.
It's true in other religions too, though, where, like, you have
30
you have the wives in
virgins,
heaven
yeah.
if you sacrifice yourself for your religion.
Yeah, but it's a little jarring to hear and disturbing to hear in you know, from something that's supposed to be more pious and about something else. So it was surprising to me that leadership would go sort of so basic and you guys like to, or not you anymore, but they will say we're on the earth but not of the earth,
Right.
and that's so worldly and so earthly, and we, you know, not to condemn wanting an attractive spouse. That's a thing I think a lot of people want, but to hear it come, like such a worldly thing, come from leadership, one, is surprising. Two, it as a woman who's also a human, it's like such a commodification
Absolutely.
of women and our bodies, and saying you're gonna get a wife. Who cares about anything else? But she's gonna be fucking hot.
Yeah.
Whatever you get, like at least she's gonna be hot if you do your good work. So, and what I said to the man was, you know, why it was so disturbing to me. This guy who came up to us afterwards, I said, I happen to know that I am a woman and also a human, and I'm not a prize. I'm not a treat. I'm not a commodity. So the fact that like hot women are being dangled in this very pious religion is just sort of like disturbing.
And it is no surprise that we have like plastic surgeons. Like we have the highest number of plastic surgeons per capita here in Utah than any other state in the world, because women are commodified.
Yeah.
They're looking like their worth, their value is based on how they look. That's not true for everyone, but shows like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives show how important it is for women to be beautiful,
Right.
to be that prize for men. And Natasha Heffler, in the same sentence, said that men are promised these gorgeous women, but women on their missions are promised righteous men. The better you are at your mission, the better priesthood holder he's going to be. The more you're going to have like this emotional bond, because they're speaking to what women typically want or are taught
told that
to
they
want. Yes, that they are told to want rather than what the men. Though I did kind of want to identify that in that movie Heretic that we watched about the two sister missionaries that knocked into Hugh Grant's. Need to see that movie, brilliant. But at the very beginning, they're like carrying their bikes up the hill, and one of the sisters says to the other, like, the more stairs we climb, the hotter our husbands will be. So at least that was a nod to what's being taught in the church, but typically it's the other way around, where men are saying that rather than the women.
Yeah, and I think in that film, in the beginning, I think they are setting up that these girls they're in it, and as you dive into the film, you learn maybe they're not quite as much as you might initially suspect. One of them, spoiler alert, stop watching if you haven't seen the film. One of them has an implanted birth control, which is a no, 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 no. Whether you're married or not, you do not use birth control. But definitely if you're not married, because you'd be having sex, and cannot have sex if you are not married. And they also, one of the girls early in the film talks about the porn that she's sort of like nebulously been exposed to. So I think at the beginning of the film, they are trying to let you know the girls aren't as whole hog in it as it might appear on the surface, as these like sort of pious go-getter missionaries. So, and I wonder a little bit if that's the part of it, because if that was also a little nod to that, because I don't think there are. I mean, you wouldn't have probably certainly said anything like that.
Never would have said something like that on my mission ever.
Yeah, and I think a lot of missionary girls would not say something like that. And that was another a really interesting point for me that she made. And again, this sort of bleeds over into the world, the regular secular non-Mormon world, but it's like amplified and magnified in the Mormon world. And so one woman got up and asked basically about sort of, and this woman was probably in her maybe early 50s, sort of asked about sex within marriage and how how that translates differently for men and women. And she said this woman, I think, had left the church but was still struggling with a lot of the messaging that she got. And basically what Mormons are told is, you know, before you're married, you don't think about it, you don't touch it, you don't touch anyone else, this is bad, this is the zone of evil, do not engage with it, any thoughts are impure. And then when you're married, go get it, hit it like
Where are
bunnies.
the grandchildren?
Yeah. So and this woman was sort of struggling with that because and dug into this deeper layer of the messaging and how that is portrayed to differently to men versus women. So men are told like, yeah, you want it, but you got to keep it in pants, you got to keep it under control. Just wait till you get married, you do a really good job, you get a hot wife, and then it is pussy town. But women are told you gotta protect. You gotta protect. This isn't a thing that you want to do.
No.
Dirty,
No.
shame.
Right.
But you don't let a boy do this to you until after, and then you can gift it or endure it. And I think for, it's really bad messaging for anybody on any side of things. But and it, again, it's like amplified in Mormonism, even though that happens on the outside world. There's the whole like, you bust out a shotgun to, if you have a pretty daughter, you better get out the shotgun to protect her from sex because we don't like sex at all. We need to be protected from that. So it does happen on the outside world, but I think it's magnified within Mormonism, and also really sad and bad messaging for everybody. And I think Natasha did a really good job of breaking that down and showing that that's maybe not the best way for men or women to move forward. And I thought that was fascinating.
And how awesome that she is there to provide her services with her company and the people that she works with. And I'm sure a lot of them are ex-Mormons who are still trying to unpack years and years and years of sexual shaming and indoctrination. I thought it was a fantastic workshop that she gave. We had a chance to go meet her afterward, just gushed over how wonderful she was, and would love to have her on as a guest. And we will be having her on in a little while.
Yeah, that'll be really fun because she had a lot of really great and interesting things to say. So you'll be hearing more from her hopefully very soon when we have her on as a guest. And I can't wait to dive into everything. Oh my gosh, that's going to be such a fun time.
It will. We're just kind of scratching the surface here, but it was the best way to kick off the Sunstone was hearing from Natasha.
Yeah.
One of the things that Natasha mentioned was the wound of pornography with men, especially here in the state of Utah, because we've heard before men have been told not to play with their little factories, to just not touch themselves, from their teenage years when they have their annual interview with the bishop and he asks them, do you touch yourselves? And people are like, what does that even mean? Right. But there is a wound of pornography that was addressed in this workshop. And I recall back in 2016 when the governor of the state of Utah, Gary Herbert, called like a public health emergency was pornography. Public health emergency in Utah, pornography. And
who knew? Devastating
and
communities.
And then Natasha says, like, everywhere else in the world, they're like, what? What are you talking about? So let's hear your perspective, Erica.
Okay, well, first, I'm going to say what ended up being the effect of that. If you don't live in Utah, you don't know, pornography is now illegal in this state to come by. I'm sure there's some made here, but you cannot. If you exist anywhere else in the United States, you might understand that you can access Pornhub or any other number of online pornography that you cannot access here. My sister, who is visiting me, did not believe me. She was like, what? That is not. She went to Pornhub and she was like, whoa. There's a message that says, due to whatever, blah, 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 this is not available. At one point, you could register. I mean, basically outing yourself as a fucking pervert. If you register to be able to view it. And I think there might be some sites that you can do that for. Pornhub said, no way, we are not exposing our viewers, our audience, our customers to this. So they pulled it out. So they pulled out. They
I do know what that means.
There you go. Look at you learning. That's fun. So it's not accessible here. And I think like the topic of pornography and like whether or not it is an issue is very layered and I don't think it's black and white at all. Like I think you might expect that I'd be like, yeah. And partly I am, but there are a lot of layers to how pornography is made, how pornography is consumed, who pornography is made for. And there
Is it done
are,
consensually or not? Yeah.
and a lot of it has gotten sort of down the rabbit hole of incredibly misogynistic, to the point of bordering on violence in some instances, and definitely sort of the used and abused trend is something that is prevalent. And then there's the other side of it, which is and something that Natasha addressed in saying to a lot of the men, Mormon men, like, you need to not engage with this, and women, you need to make sure your men aren't doing this. And again, you're telling everybody that watching people have sex is something that men want to do and that women don't, which is completely false. I have watched porn and enjoy it. I know lots of women who have done the same. And in giving that messaging, basically, again, reiterates that sex is something for men to enjoy and for women to endure or gift or use. With pornography, again, it can get a little bit, there are lots of layers to it and lots of things to look at. I don't think that and then there are addictions, and I think especially with men in the Mormon church who are told they can't do all of these other things, that is something that they could turn to. But overall, I think when it is consensual, and there aren't people that are being abused or mistreated or coerced.
Children, minors, never,
Well, of
ever,
course,
ever,
yeah.
ever.
Of
We have to
course.
make that
Of
clear.
course.
Yeah. But for some people, that may not be an of course thing, but there's no consent there, right?
Yeah.
If it's, like you said, consensually, ethically, whatever, where it's a way for people to get aroused. I mean, and who cares how you do it? For me, I have looked at porn. It's not my thing. It's not my jam. And that's okay. I get to make that decision for myself.
Yeah.
And,
As adults should.
And I'm always a huge advocate of education. And the more you learn about something, the more you're able to make that informed decision for yourself. But if it's just a no, bad, no wonder people get addicted to it, because addiction stems from a place of shame.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think within like the Mormon community, there is no, it's kind of like with alcohol or anything else. There is no sort of safe consumption within the Mormon community. You cannot engage with
Not at
this.
all.
And I think that's where things get really sketchy from my perspective, because there isn't anything on its face wrong with it. And I'll go into a little, one little tangent. When I was working in Utah Valley, there was a woman, she was Mormon, and we were having the conversation about, soda. And we've talked about that. And she said, well, yeah, it's not just soda though. The Mormons do, lots of things that are not safe. Like they eat lots of fried food. And I was like, yeah. And she was like, and some consume pornography. And I was like, well, I think that's okay. And she was like, oh, okay. And I could tell she had never, because, like, again, when I've mentioned like drinking wine to a Mormon, I might as well tell them I shoot up heroin. And this is kind of the I don't shoot up heroin, by the way, but it was kind of the reaction. Like, she never sort of confronted like what is necessarily wrong with pornography. And there can be things that are wrong with engaging with it or wrong in the way that it's done. But she never considered that it could be done or watched ethically. And like she sort of unwound in front of me, which was really interesting to see.
That could have been a conversation you and I had a couple of years ago, because you're saying that, I'm like, I totally would have that same reaction. But it is comes down to education, and making that decision for yourself.
Making an informed decision as an adult who has agency over what they choose to engage with. Yeah. So do you want to move on to John Dehlin's talk now?
Yeah, for sure. John Dehlin, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the host of Mormon Stories podcast, which is probably the largest podcast within the ex-Mormon community. His podcast is largely very, very successful and comes from a very objective point of view. They really try to be objective, and they have all kinds of members of the church, former members of the church, never Mormons, whoever that come in, and just share their experiences. So John Dehlin, this Mormon Stories podcast host, spoke, and it was a packed room. It was a lot of people knew who he was. They wanted to hear his story. He's an engaging speaker,
And he's probably the biggest name in ex-Mormon
yeah.
spaces.
Yeah. So we got a chance to go and hear him. And he talked a lot about how the internet has influenced Mormonism and ex-Mormonism in the last, what, 20 some odd years. Since the advent of the internet, we have so much more information, and it comes down to making informed decisions for yourself. And so he talked a lot about his experience going on his mission, seeing the corruption of the church within that mission, and coming to realize that it wasn't real. But as he was going through his faith crisis, like a lot of us, I believe, while you're going through a faith crisis, you've been taught this is true and you want to make it work. You still want to make it work. And I didn't realize this, but when he started Mormon Stories back in 2005, and there were other handful of like Mormon podcasts at the time, he started this with the intent of helping people to like strengthen their faith from that place of having all of this information. But he had learned some things, a lot of which was from Sunstone magazine, that just did not sit well from him until he was excommunicated from the church.
And that's sort of something that has been reiterated, and I've heard sort of multiple times now. So if someone is going and looking for, they start to question, and they start to kind of go, some of this isn't making sense. I need to dig deeper and reaffirm my faith. And then when they do that, whenever you dig deeper, or in many instances when you dig deeper, you unaffirm your faith. So that happened with John Dehlin, with the CES.
Jeremy Reynolds.
The guy who wrote the CES letter, who is looking to have his faith reaffirmed. And then with your friend Ken, who we're going to have on a future episode, who, from what I understand, was looking into everything and saying, I'm going to use the science and I'm going to show these atheist fuckers what's what. And then he dug in and went, oh shit. So that's going to be a fun episode. I'm excited about that.
I am too. I thought it was fascinating what John Dehlin was saying about baseball baptisms. Have you heard of this before, Erica?
I had never heard of this. This is the very first time. Had you heard of it?
I had heard of it.
You knew this.
But
you know when you were in?
Yeah, my dad had even said on his mission, he had served where this was and this was in the 60s. He served in the 60s where this had been done in England. There was a very big controversy about this. So the story is in the 1960s, as the church is really trying to grow their membership, because they do. More
money.
The missionaries were encouraged to go and start these baseball leagues, but in order to join the league, you had to be baptized a member of the church.
And everyone wanted to play baseball at the time. Like it was the 60s. It was like America, it was the all-American sport. It was what every man wanted to do, every boy wanted to do.
So
it was very effective.
Small price to pay. You go in, you get dunked in water. Yeah, you get to play baseball, but how absolutely corrupt that is, where you're giving away your soul, as it were, for this sport. And John Dehlin identified that during this time, there were two members of our current general authorities, Jeffrey Holland and Quentin Cook, who served in this mission at the time. You would think that something like that would tell them that this was just not okay, that's corrupt, but nope, that's just an effective tool for baptizing. Fortunately, that doesn't happen any longer, or I hope it doesn't happen any longer, but it is a lot of pressure. I mean, I served a mission. We'll talk about missions in future episodes, but it's constantly like you need to serve, and you set your mission, your baptism goal for the month. You report back to your leaders all of this time. And if you don't meet your goal, then you don't feel as good. John Dehlin talked about the rewards that were used in his mission, like the business model. Like if you get X number of baptisms, you get to go to the special luncheon. You get these rewards for having baptisms, just like you would do in a business, right? You motivate your salespeople.
And he talked about the numbers, and I don't remember off the top of my head what the numbers were exactly, but they were kind of insane, like off the charts. And he was, so it was like something like 300 in a month. And he was like, there are 30 days in a month. So like do the math. That's not quite the numbers. But he basically said what was happening is that the missionaries would go, they'd play ball and like audition the guys all day, for baseball, and then say, hey, you guys want to just like off the top of my head here, you guys want to come back to the church and like hang out and talk? They bring them, or the temple, whatever, and bring them back. And everyone, he said they were doing cannonballs
Oh my
into the
gosh.
baptismal font, and just it was a big party. But then, whoa, you are then bound to the church and tithed, and now you are a member and you've been roped in sort of before you even know. And what I didn't think of at the time, and the way that you phrased it just now, what I didn't think of when John Dehlin was talking about it, and as you phrased it now, there is like a very well-known sort of parable about selling your soul to the devil, to get something that you want, whether it's a career in the art, as a famous actor or musician or this or that, like, but basically giving your soul to the devil for the thing you really, really want.
Just throwing all morality, all ethics out the window in order to get what you want.
That's in some ways, in this scenario, the devil would be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and offering this, dangling this thing that all the boys, all American boys wanted, and probably a lot of boys around the world, because at that time the United States was kind of this, whatever, shining castle on a hill.
Because of business.
Well, and because of the lots of things at that time. But it's interesting to me in that scenario, the church is the devil and dangling this thing that everyone wants, baseball. Well, you can have this, but you gotta come give us your stuff, which is very satanic and like the mythical sense of the thing, which is really sort of fascinating and horrific and disgusting.
And the church will always say, well, it's not the church, it's the people. It's
Nope.
always the people. It's whatever this person was and how he did this on him. And then all of those people who engaged in it, it's all on them, but it doesn't come from the top, which is just not okay.
And it's also untrue because it's coming obviously directly from the church wanting to get as many baptisms as possible, because the more baptisms, the more money, the more power, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And one of the other interesting things that John Dehlin said was just in talking about who was excommunicated and who was not excommunicated.
Yeah.
And like you said, those the people who were engaged in this are now part of the upper echelons of the church and have been moved up and up and up, even though they've done this really unethical, unscrupulous thing, dangling baseball in front of these kids, boys, men, to get them into the church. They have been elevated to the highest status within the church, whereas people like Natasha Helfer, who was just a sex therapist doing her job and behaving with integrity, has been excommunicated. And people like John Dehlin, who was just digging in and sort of looking for information, off with their head, which is really fascinating that so many really good people with good intentions have been excommunicated. And these people with really bad intentions, doing very unscrupulous things, have been elevated to the highest levels of church leadership.
Yeah. John Dehlin made the point of how the internet has helped with this exodus from the church, and how where people used to be excommunicated kind of on the hush hush, on the down low, the advent of the internet has made that far more public knowledge for people. So people like you've mentioned, John Dehlin and others, but Sam Young was a man who was really outspoken a bit against the idea of children going in and having an interview with a grown man in a closed bishop's office. He was advocating for these children. He was excommunicated, and
for saying like kids should not be alone in a room with a man
who may or may not be a predator, but you don't know. But your priority should be the children.
Should be.
Your priority should be the children, but it's not. So he also made this point, John Dehlin, that because of these public things being published on the internet, and the church can't hide the internet, they start making changes because of the things that happen in the news. So suddenly, after Sam Young's excommunicated, well, now parents have the option to go in and sit with their children in interviews in the church. That's now a new policy. And when Kate Kelly was she was a woman, and I remember being in the church at the time thinking, ooh, she was kind of a bad name, because she was insistent that women should be able to at least go to the priesthood sessions at General Conference.
What?
And was like, why
You
can't
can't do
women?
that with a vagina.
It was called Ordained Women. Like, they really wanted, she was leading the charge saying, hey, women want to be treated as equals. What if we were to have the priesthood too? And she would go to general conferences, and they would protest at conference that women were not able to go in, excommunicated. But then suddenly the church is saying, well, now women, they can be witnesses at baptisms where they couldn't before. Let's throw you a bone.
Throw your
Let's
bone.
throw a
Well, a
bone.
little bit of change. At least it is a little
It's
bit
a
of
little bit of
change.
change because of this. And so those are just two examples of many, and how many times the temple ceremonies have changed, because they've changed a lot from the time that I first went to the time before.
You don't have
I
to
just
cover your
left.
face with a veil
You don't have to
anymore.
cover yourself with a face.
Your shameful, shameful lady face.
As women, you don't have to covenant to your husbands, who then covenant to God. Now women can actually covenant to God themselves. Yeah.
He doesn't like just falter looking at our disgusting figures and faces, shameful, shameful lady faces and bodies.
But
My goodness.
yeah, the point though of John Dehlin is, he talked really in depth of how the internet has been used for good and for bad, I guess, in publicly shaming people by excommunicating them, though some people don't think that's shameful. They think it's a badge of honor these days, being excommunicated. It could be
I want to join just so I can get excommunicated because it sounds like a hoot.
trying
It's a
moment.
trying moment. Erica gets
Right.
excommunicated.
I can't wait.
So much fun.
But on the one hand, you have those people who are being excommunicated, but on the other hand, the church makes changes.
Yeah. Well, and he talks a lot about sort of, and he asked the audience, which was interesting because his audience, I would say, was probably 99.8 ex-Mormon / never Mormon, but mostly like people who have left the church. I don't think there were a whole lot of Mormons in the audience. And one of the questions he posed, and this is sort of interesting, he said, who here thinks that you can make better change within the Mormon church from within or without? Who thinks without? And all the hands went up. And he said, who thinks within? And everyone was kind of like, but he did make the point that a lot of those people who made the changes, even if they were excommunicated at the time that the changes were made or sort of put into motion, they were within the church, and that a lot of effective change can be made just as much from within, if not more so in some instances than without, which was really interesting, especially in a crowd of mostly people who are like, I'm never setting foot in that fucking place again.
Yeah.
You know, and for him too, who's been excommunicated and out for many years at this point.
Which is why I would love to just give a lot of love on the people who are PMOs, physically and mentally out, that do continue to go, that they don't believe, and they do want to mark change from within. I give them all the props in the world. If it works for you, let us know. But experience has kind of taught that it probably won't.
Probably not forever.
Not forever. Maybe you can for a little while. But again, if you are one of those PMOs and you have positive experiences of making change within even if within your ward or within your local organization, please let us know. We would love to hear about that.
Yeah. The final thing I wanted to say about John Dehlin, which was really great and interesting, he gave a really lovely shout out to women, and a lot of women who are speaking out in the ex-Mormon space, which is, if you're never Mormon and you watch this, you might be like, yeah, great, whatever. But to have someone who, you know, sort of grew up in the church and was told his whole life that he was very, very special because of his penis, and not ever have to really think about the other side. And he said something to that effect too, like why he had heard after he left that women were somewhat upset that they had never had the priesthood, and he said, that never even crossed my mind.
Right.
He said, I wonder why. And props to him for realizing that he came from a place of privilege and had a thing and never looked at this whole other half of the population who did not have the thing until he left, and then, was able to have this realization. So a person that grew up kind of steeped in this with all this privilege, to be on the other side of it and go, there are a lot of women in this ex-Mormon space, making noise, using their voices, making waves. And he gave a shout out to Alyssa Grenfell, Natasha Helfer,
Brett Hartley.
Yeah, Brett Hartley, who's No Nonsense Spirituality on TikTok.
Rebecca Biblioteca, lots of other ex-Mormon voices that are women.
Us.
Well,
Never Mormon, ex-Mormon. He did not give a shout out to us.
One day,
John Dillon. But that was inspiring to hear someone who, 2 decades ago could have not even, it wouldn't have even been a blip on his radar, to now be able to look out. And a lot of those people were in the audience, and he could point them out and give them the recognition that they deserve. For me, that was a really interesting moment to hear him talk about that. And kudos to all those women, because we watch a lot of their content, and they're just so smart and informed and using their voices to affect positive change, which I think could lead us into our last talk that we went to, right?
Yeah.
So the last talk that we went to was with Alyssa Grenfell, who's probably the second biggest name in the ex-Mormon space, I would think, next to John Dillon.
Or maybe even the biggest,
Maybe the biggest. She wrote the book How to Leave Mormonism?
How to Leave the Mormon Church.
How to Leave the Mormon Church.
Which I read, and it's fascinating. If anybody wants a step-by-step, play-by-play, if I was really, really fortunate with my exit from the church, but I know that not everybody had that kind of the support. And so if you are one of those that's just kind of wondering how to get out, it's a great, great, great resource to help you with that step-by-step faith deconstruction.
And she just has such a positive voice. She's super interesting. We got to meet her. We chatted with her for a few minutes. She is a lovely, friendly, wonderful person. And she had a lot of just really great things to say. She's very articulate. She's very thoughtful. I loved hearing what she had to say and listening to her speak. She's started a podcast, or she's a co-host of a podcast that some other folks have started.
Alyssa was part of a panel with Tim Kosnoff, who was a lawyer, a nevermormon lawyer, who super impressed with, who had a role in exposing and advocating for the rights of a lot of children who had been abused by members of the church. And so this podcast they've started is called Architecture of Abuse. And what did you learn about that, Erica? It's my favorite. Although not my favorite. I don't love sharing this dark, really shitty side of Mormon history and sadly in our current history.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, I think that the title is just perfect. And so I love when a title can be so informative about what the thing is about. So Architecture of Abuse implies that abuse isn't something that just sort of happens or is, some sort of like side effect or, something like that. It is something that is actually structurally sustained, built in, structurally supported by the church. It is baked in. It is part and parcel of this organization and the way that it is put together and
it's
constructed.
Intentional too.
And it's intentional.
There's a plan behind it. An architecture has to design something. They have to create it. I mean, they have to think of it and before it happens. And that's really what the church is. The church is a place of abuse.
Yeah.
It abuses its members and getting them to think that they are less than, and they need to go back to the top. And so, yes, it may not be sexually. Oh, I guess we can say sexually now.
We're not on TikTok.
It may not be sexual abuse all of the time, but there are other forms of abuse within the church. Lots and lots of abuse.
Yeah, coercion, manipulation, all of the cult tactics. This particular podcast is about sexual abuse of children, and how that is also, I mean, if you build in one sort of abuse, you sort of build the you enable other kinds of abuse, and that is certainly true for children. The moment in this talk where I just kind of, again, my jaw dropped, and it was the most like chicken skin moment of the day for me. Literally all my hairs stood on crazy end, and I was just sort of taken aback and appalled, and I shouldn't be at this point, but the level of intentionality of what I'm about to tell you was sort of mind blowing. It's not just that the abuse happens, it's that it is actively supported and condoned in a very official way. And again, like that is it's gross and horrific, and especially for an organization that, you know, it says it's all about the children and they're the most sacred and precious, but not if they get in the way. Not if they get in the way. If there's something that's happening with the children that is going to undermine or threaten the church, fuck those kids. Fuck them. And that was the thing that was like, and this is how it happens. So, and Alyssa did a really good job of articulating this and telling this story. She said, so if it is reported to a bishop or somebody higher up in the church leadership that abuse is happening, when that person leaves, whether it's a child reporting it or a parent saying this happened to my kid or whatever, the very first thing that the bishop has to do is call a helpline. That sounds correct and innocent, right? That sounds like what you would do. You'd call a helpline. It's not that kind of helpline. It is a helpline to the lawyers, the legal team for the church. They will immediately assess what the liability is of the church. They are instructed absolutely under no circumstances to call 911 or the police. They are forbidden from calling 911 or the police. Their very first objective is to protect the church at all costs and fuck those kids. And that is what is like, I don't have words. Like, that is horrific and mind-blowing. And this happens over and over and over and over again. And it's condoned and it is supported because, like you said, at least until recently, kids were going into the bishop's office all alone and asked to tell them about how and when and if they masturbate. If there is not a fertile ground for abuse, I don't know. If that is not a fertile ground for abuse, I don't know what is.
I would encourage anyone to go check out the website. It's called floodlit.org. And at this website, the whole purpose is to floodlight, to expose all of these LDS church leaders who were found guilty of sexually abusing children. And some of them did have to go through, some of them were held accountable. I don't believe that it was done a lot because of the church intervening and say, oh, you need to do
We'll
this.
just move them over here. We'll just move them over here. We'll just
Right.
take them out of this ward and put them into this ward.
But if you want to have your mind blown, go to floodlit.org and you will find bishops, stake presidents, scout leaders back in the day, anyone who had access to children. The numbers are appalling. The stories are appalling of the number of men that have gotten away with this kind of atrocity. I'm a former educator, and as an educator, like, the idea of hurting one of these kids just makes my skin crawl. Like, my number one priority was to keep these kids safe. And for you to put these kids in a vulnerable situation where they could be attacked like that just infuriates me. And the fact that you don't hold these people accountable.
And even if they're excommunicated or moved or have some sort of retribution within the church, they are never reported to the police, at least from this avenue. Like, if there is abuse reported in the church, there is a wall to the police because the church doesn't want to accept any responsibility, any liability, and they will throw every child under the bus to protect themselves. And that is what is so horrifying and mind-blowing.
And fortunately, there are people who do go get help. I mean, there are lots of cases against the church. They've had to be taken to court. I mean, there are people who are doing it more and more,
Thank
which
goodness,
is fantastic.
for this lawyer.
Oh yeah, the Tim Kosnoff, who has been able to advocate for the rights of these kids to not grow up, but it's happened all the time. In Utah, we have clergy penitent privilege, which under law, they are not required to report this.
That's because the church is basically the legislature here. The church runs the state of Utah. They have tentacles in every aspect of the government here. And so absolutely they want to protect their own, not protect the children, protect the pedophiles at all costs if they have anything to do with the church.
Fortunately, things have changed a little bit within the church. And my last calling in the church, I was a nursery leader, which means I got to work with little kids. And fortunately, you always have to have the leaders that are too deep in the church. So if you have any calling in the church, if you're in the primary, you cannot be teaching the children on your own. You have to have another adult in the room, which I think is great. Brilliant. And if somebody has to be sick that day, you find a substitute to fill in. I think that's wonderful. So things have changed over time because the church has had to learn from experience. Also, I mean, in addition to that, is everyone who does work with children and youth have to go through a short little training. I think it took me maybe a half hour to 45 minutes to watch a tiny little training put out by the church, like, hey, don't do this to kids. And then you go to the secretary over whatever organization and you say, yeah, I did that. Okay, great, you did it. But I mean, small changes, small wins, hooray. But that hadn't happened for generations before. Well, like I said, school educator, every single year, I had to watch training on how to not only avoid abusing your children, but how to report it, to find ways to be an advocate. So like anybody in the state of Utah who works with children outside of the church is required by law. You have to go to DCFS and you report this, whether or not you can prove that it's happened. That should be a priority. But in Utah, we have clergy penitent privilege within the church. If somebody goes and confesses to a bishop, well, let's give you just a clean slate because we don't want to ruin this man's life. We don't want to ruin his life. He's got such a promising future. He's got such a promising
Never mind about the kids or the woman or whoever
Right.
is being abused or assaulted.
Right.
And and again, there's no avenue for the police where you should be compelled to have to report something like that. You have to as a therapist.
Right.
If I've been in therapy, you can say lots of things to your therapist that sometimes maybe are a little disturbing. But if you are reporting active harm to another human being or the intention to harm yourself, they are by law legally required to report that if they think that you are a threat to yourself or anybody else. And in the church, it's just carte blanche. You don't have to report it at all. And the church mandates that you absolutely do not report it to the police because it could reflect poorly on the church, which is kind of bananas because it reflects so much more poorly on them. I would have some respect for the church if they did not have that policy in place and they said, you know what? We will take one for the team. We have to protect the children that we report to love and honor and cherish so much. We're going to have to, even if this is bad for us, we have to report this. But that's not what they do because they don't care about anything other than their bottom line, their reputation, their power. And that's it.
Yeah. So I asked a question there was a Q&A and I went up just because I was thinking a lot. And I asked the question, so what if we were to take away this clergy penitent privilege? What if we were to require bishops, stake presidents, whomever, what if we were to require them to report abuse? Would that change the outcome? Because I was thinking, what if I were a man and I felt like I needed to get something off of my chest? I go report to my bishop knowing there are going to be no consequences attached. What if I knew the bishop had to report me? Would I be more likely to go to that bishop? So I asked this question, and Tim, the lawyer, was awesome. He responded and saying, most often it's not the abusers who make the reports as it is. It's not. It's usually like the victims or maybe the mother of the child or someone else will come. And so taking away that clergy penitent privilege wouldn't make that much of a difference anyway, but it would be helping. And then he answered the best way. He's like, I don't care. He said, I don't care if that's in or out of place. I think it should be required, and let's get these kids protected.
Yeah, because 9.9 times out of 10, it is somebody else who is going to be doing the reporting. And even if they're on some of those chances where a guy or a woman, but probably a guy, comes in and says, "Oh, I did this, bad thing." As it stands now, there aren't really consequences for them. They might,
They might get excommunicated.
but they won't be reported to the police. At the end of the day, I guess it doesn't really matter if you take that away. And most of the people who are reporting anyway, are the abused and not the abuser. But it was a great question, and I think it was really interesting. But the podcast Architecture of Abuse, we are super looking forward to checking out. Looking forward maybe to isn't the right word, but I think it sounds impactful and important. So definitely give it a listen. And I think they started in January as well, and have a bunch of episodes out. So we will be listening to that as well. It should be a sort of a fascinating and disturbing watch.
Right. So Sunstone this year was really awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
Just knowing that there are people out there that are taking their time to speak out against, and it's never about the members of the church. It never is.
No, it's about leadership.
It's about the leadership. It's about the corruption of the church for people who know what they're doing is harmful. They fully are aware, and they choose the sin of pride. They condemn the sin of pride, and yet they fully engage in it because power and money are far more important than the lives of victims of abuse.
And if the opposite were true, they would not be lawyering up so hard and having that instant line. When this is reported, this is protocol. You call this helpline, and they are going to immediately go into assess the liability of the church and how to best protect the church, not how to best protect the children.
Or the women, or the other men, or
the abused
who is a part of the church, and everyone who is a member of the church. Gets some form of abuse. Yeah. So definitely check out the podcast Architecture of Abuse. If you are able to attend Sunstone at some point, we recommend it. As a nevermormon, it was super fascinating for me, and just it was a cool space to be in, and just like meeting people and talking with folks all throughout the day. It was exhausting, but it was worth it and really fun. And I had a really great sort of eye-opening, interesting time. I think we'll cut to a trying moment, because this was my first Sunstone. So now it's time for a trying moment.
And now it's time for a trying moment.
A little bit of sun is what I need. A little bit of air so I can breathe. I just need a distraction from all of the madness. It's all that I'm asking.
And then
Well, that was fun.
That was fun.
What a good day.
No, it's great. We met so many wonderful people, had a great experience. So we encourage everyone to check out sunstone.org. Check out any of the podcasts of the people that we listen to. And Natasha has one, John Dillon has one, and Alyssa and Tom Kosnoff have another that we encourage people to check out as well. So, and if for this podcast you liked anything that you've had a chance to hear, if you would be so good as to leave us a review, a like, a share, let us know how this is meaningful to you. You can check out our new website, twonomos.com, TWONOMOS.com, and let us know what you think.
Yeah, we would super appreciate it. We love what we're doing, and we want other people to love what we're doing too.
So, anything else?
I think that's it. I think it's time to say cheers to deconstructing Mormonism.